Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for your interest in Oklahoma thistles and our regulations, how to identify them, and also how to manage them. I will be moderating this. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will go through the questions probably after each person speaks, and then we'll have a session at the very end of all of our talks that you can ask additional questions. So please put your questions in the chat, and we will get started with Amy Buthod, who is going to be talking to us about thistle identification and the ones we have here in Oklahoma. So Amy, you can share your screen when you are ready.
All right, are we good here?
Looks good.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am Amy Buthod, and I am a botanist at the Oklahoma Biological Survey. And this morning, I'm going to talk briefly about some thistles of Oklahoma. First of all, what exactly is a thistle? Some people might define or describe a thistle in different ways. Some people might refer to any plant that has a purple flower and is prickly as a thistle, such as this Leavenworth's Oringo up in the upper right-hand corner. Also, a lot of plants have the word thistle in their common name, such as Russian thistle or the sow thistle that is shown here. We're going to talk about thistles today. We're going to think about them in a more scientific way, just because that's easier, based on how the species are classified from an evolutionary standpoint or how closely they are related to each other. In this sense, a thistle is a member of the Carduae tribe, which is part of the sunflower family. In Oklahoma, there are 19 species of the Carduae tribe. Not all of them have purple flowers, and not all of them are prickly. For instance, the American basket flower, Plectocephalus americanus, is a true thistle. It's a member of the tribe, but it's not prickly. On the top right is a yellow star thistle with flowers that are yellow in color rather than purple. Despite this, however, it is a true thistle. Also, not all species with the word thistle in their common names are true thistles. The photo on the bottom right, a familiar weed, sow thistle or Sonchus asper, it's from a completely different part of the sunflower family, being closely related to things like dandelions and lettuces. Of the 19 true thistle species in Oklahoma, 9 of them are native. Only 9 of them are native. These include American basket flower, yellow thistle, swamp thistle, Carolina thistle, Texas thistle, yellow spine thistle, wavy leaf thistle, tall thistle, and Engelmann's thistle. And I just learned it's really hard to say thistle that many times in a row. 10 of the 19 true thistle species in Oklahoma are exotic species. These include burdock, milk thistle, woolly distaff thistle, yellow star thistle, cornflower, Russian knapweed, bull thistle, musk thistle, Scotch thistle, and Canada thistle. Non-native thistles have been moving into Oklahoma since the 20s, with notable introductions of 3 problematic species in the 40s, 50s, and 70s. These 3 species, musk thistle, Scotch thistle, and Canada thistle, are actually classified as noxious weeds in the state of Oklahoma. All of these exotic thistles are on the Oklahoma Invasive Plant Council's watch list of invasive and potentially invasive species, with the exception of milk thistle, woolly distaff thistle, and cornflower. I think milk thistle is only known from 1 county in the state, woolly distaff from maybe 2, but however, cornflower is much more common and probably should be added to our watch list. Priscilla and I both saw lots of it around wheat fields in Grady and Canadian County just this spring. Whoop. A noxious weed law passed in 2000 identifies musk thistle, Scotch thistle, and Canada thistle as noxious weeds. The law states that these species are public nuisances in all counties across the state, and that it shall be the duty of every landowner in each county to treat, control, or eradicate them on their land every year to prevent them from going to seed. Priscilla will elaborate on this in a few minutes. Of the 3 noxious species, musk thistle is by far the most common in Oklahoma. It's been found in the majority of counties in the body of the state. It was first noted in Payne County in 1946. There are just a few reports of Canada thistle in extreme south central Oklahoma, but the only record I could track down is from Bryan County, and it doesn't have an herbarium specimen associated with it. It's also been reported from the Panhandle, but again, I can't find a good source for that. Scotch thistle currently seems to be limited to western Oklahoma counties, like Roger Mills and Ellis. It was first reported in Roger Mills in 1976. So why can exotic thistles become problematic? Thistles share a number of characteristics that enable exotic species to become invasive species. They typically develop a large rosette of leaves at the base of the plant that shades soil and reduces competition from other emerging species. They have seed that's easily dispersed by wind. As you can see, they've got a structure similar to that of dandelions that allows them to be carried through the air. They also are dispersed by water, birds, and other animals, and they may stick to vehicles and equipment and easily, very easily be introduced to new areas via seed in hay. Some thistles also have allelopathic properties that slow or prevent the growth of neighboring plants. Musk thistle extracts have been shown to inhibit seed germination and root elongation of other species, but also shown to actually promote the germination of their own seeds. Canada thistle extracts have also been shown to do the same sorts of things. And obviously, thistles have some pretty good defense mechanisms. Some members of the Cardui tribe have spines or prickles on their leaves, stems, or on the bracts that surround the flowers. These structures prevent plants from herbivores, protect the plants from herbivores, limiting grazing. Most of the time, anyway. Since more than half of the state's 19 thistle species are introduced, people tend to see a thistle and automatically think it's bad and that it needs to be removed. As a result, native thistles suffer. But thistles have good qualities too, and that's why it's so important to be able to recognize our native species. Thistles are very beneficial to wildlife, especially pollinators. They have great nectar and pollen resources for insects. For instance, monarch butterflies visit native thistle flowers more than any other wildflowers in some regions during their migration. Thistles also provide nutrient and oil-rich seeds for birds. Thistle seeds make up a third of the diet of the American goldfinch, for instance. And also some species are specific hosts to butterfly larvae, such as those of the painted lady. And many other invertebrates use the stems and flowers and other structures as overwintering habitats. Unfortunately, however, there aren't any reliable rules for telling which species are native and which are exotic, and there are a couple of misconceptions about that I'd like to clear up. One thing I am frequently asked about is bicolored leaves. Specifically, is it true that you can tell native thistles from exotic thistles by their leaf color? If a species has bicolored leaves, where the top of the leaf is significantly different in color from the bottom of the leaf, well, supposedly it is a native species. These examples show that this doesn't work. Tall thistle and Engelmann's thistle on the right are both native thistles with bicolored leaves, while musk thistle and Scotch thistle are non-natives with bicolored leaves. There are native thistles without bicolored leaves as well. Yellow thistle and swamp thistle, for instance, have leaves that are similarly colored on both sides. So this character, not a reliable one. Another assumption regarding the nativity of a species relates to the size and or density of the population. If a population is dense or nearly a monoculture, some people will presume the species in question to be invasive and exotic. This is because non-native species aren't kept in check in foreign environments. There aren't any insects or diseases that have evolved with them, so they go kind of crazy. While native thistles seldom form large monocultures or population, this is not a solid rule. American basket flower is a member of the thistle tribe, and it most certainly can be found in large populations. In an attempt to help the public identify native and exotic thistles, as well as some thistle lookalikes, the Oklahoma Invasive Plant Council, along with OSU Natural Resources and the Oklahoma Biological Survey, have created this poster. It includes 12 species. 6 of these are natives. 1 of them is a native thistle lookalike, and 5 are non-native species. On the poster, the categories are easily distinguished. The exotic invasives have a brown background, and the native species have a manila background. We selected these species based on how common they are in the state and how likely they are to be mistaken for something else. The poster also includes some informational bits such as the species flowering time, its height, and some morphological characteristics such as the shape of the flower and leaf and stem descriptions. We have also included range maps. You can get this poster for free at the Oklahoma Invasive Plant Council website, which is okinvasives.org. The Oklahoma Cooperative Extension also has a great fact sheet that can be accessed online. It includes similar information to that on the poster, but is expanded and includes a vegetative key to some of the species. iNaturalist, of course, is a great resource that can help you with your thistle identifications, and you can reach out to your county extension agent or, of course, a member of the Invasive Plant Council to help you with your IDs. So to sum up my talk here, I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the most encountered thistle species in the state. Cirsium undulatum, or wavy leaf thistle, is one of our most common thistles found nearly throughout the state. It's also one of the smaller ones, ranging from only about 1/2 foot to 3 feet in height. It's densely felty hairy, appearing white or gray in color, and it has a very unique basal rosette of leaves. They have very wavy or undulant margins. Wavy leaf thistle is a perennial and is a grassland species. It will readily spread in disturbed areas. It's recognized as having special value to native bees. It attracts lots and lots of bees because it's got lots of nectar. It also provides nesting materials and is the larval host of the painted lady butterfly. Wavy leaf thistle is also known as gray thistle. Tall thistle is another very common species found throughout most of the body of the state. As the name implies, it's a tall one, reaching up to 6 feet in height. Its leaves are obviously bicolored, with the underside white, densely hairy. I have found that the tall thistle is likely to be mistaken for the invasive exotic musk thistle. I've seen large numbers of these plants that were obviously sprayed by land managers who would not be spraying native species if they had known better. And the easiest way to tell these two species apart is by when they flower. Tall thistle won't bloom until August or September, which is much later than the musk thistle, which starts to go to seed in late May. The two species also have really different flower shape. Tall thistle's flower is described as shaving brush shape, while the musk thistle flower is described as bowl shaped. We'll look at that in more detail later. Tall thistle is a perennial species, which can be found growing in both shade and sun. That makes it a little bit different from the rest of the species, who mostly prefer more open habitats. You can see tall thistle growing in the woods, thickets, fields, roadsides, and waste areas. It attracts birds and is another great nectar source. And again, it's a larval host for butterflies such as the swamp meadowlark and the painted lady. Another name for this is roadside thistle. This is the native species Cirsium acrocentrum, or yellow spine thistle. It's a perennial that blooms from June through August, and it's primarily found west of I-35 in Oklahoma. It grows in full sun in open areas, disturbed areas, grasslands, fields, and roadsides, and it's another one of our shorter thistles, again, about the same size as Cirsium undulatum, like 1/2 foot to 3 feet tall. It's got very conspicuous yellowish tannish spines all over all of its surfaces, and it looks kind of mean. At one time, this plant was actually used medicinally as a contraceptive and to treat syphilis. It also supports multiple pollinators, including moths, native bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. And another common name for this plant is cardo. Now, this is the yellow thistle, or Cirsium horridulum. As the Latin name implies, this guy also looks quite mean. It also has an early bloom time, starting in April and continuing through May. Yellow thistle is found in southeastern Oklahoma, where it's typically growing in places that stay wet. It can get really big, up to 6 feet high, and can be either a biennial or perennial. As the common name implies, the flowers of this species are sometimes yellow in color, but this isn't true in Oklahoma. Every individual I've seen in 23 years or so is always purple. Yellow thistle provides nesting materials for bees, and again, a larval host to the little meadowlark butterfly and the painted lady. It has a lot of common names, including bristle thistle, horrid thistle, purple thistle, spiny thistle, and confusingly, bull thistle, which is also used for Cirsium vulgare, an invasive exotic species. Finally, for our native thistles, this is Texas thistle or Cirsium texanum. It's a perennial, 1 to 3 feet in height, and it blooms from May through June. It's found in the southern part of the state where it grows in prairies and roadsides. Again, a great plant for pollinators. Bumblebees use the nectar, and again, another host to the painted lady butterfly. Goldfinches also use the fluffy bits attached to the fruits for nesting material. Texas purple thistle or southern thistle are other common names. A very similar species that's not on the poster is Cirsium engelmannii or Engelmann's thistle. Again, a perennial up to 6 feet high. This one blooms from May through July. It's found in prairies, old fields, roadsides, oak savannas, forest edges, and often in calcareous clay soils. All the literature says it's associated with Blackland prairie. Again, it provides nectar and nesting materials for bees. And I included it in today's talk because I think there's some confusion, both in the literature and in herbarium specimens with these two species. They are very similar in appearance, habitat, and range. The only thing that separates them in the keys is the length of the involucra, which are those green things at the base of the flowers. This character is really hard to see in herbarium specimens because they've been smashed and flattened. And as a result, I don't think it's a good way to tell these two apart. Regardless, one of these two species is blooming right now and is extremely, extremely common in southern Oklahoma. And since there's overlap between these two guys and the musk thistle, I wanted to make sure we looked at both of them. So we're just going to talk about two or more common invasive exotic species. And this is bull thistle or Cirsium vulgare. Again, relatively common. It can be an annual or a biennial, native to Eurasia. It's actually found on every single continent, but at Antarctica. It blooms from June through August, 1 to 6 feet in height, grows in sunny open conditions, and it can tolerate a lot of different environmental conditions, making it a great weed. It can actually form thickets, crowding out other vegetation. Bull thistle's distribution in Oklahoma is weird, as you can see on the map, but I think it's just because of the lack of reports. And if you visited those counties in the empty areas, you would find it. You know, people don't want to collect thistles as herbarium specimens. It can be painful, but I have noticed this one in particular becoming more common in suburban areas like Norman. And finally, probably the most problematic invasive thistle in Oklahoma is musk thistle or Carduus nutans. It is the most commonly encountered invasive exotic thistle in Oklahoma, and it's found nearly throughout the body of the state. It's a native of Eurasia and a biennial. And in Oklahoma, it occurs in grasslands and disturbed areas such as grazed pastures, roadsides, and disturbed areas. As I mentioned, musk thistle is often mistaken for tall thistle, primarily because of its size. It ranges from 1 to 6 feet in height. However, again, musk thistle has a much earlier bloom time than tall thistle. Musk thistle will bloom from May through July and is well past producing mature fruits by the time tall thistle blooms. A single musk thistle can produce over 1,000 seeds and a single plant over 10,000 seeds. These seeds can remain viable in the soil for over 10 years. Other names for musk thistle include nodding thistle or nodding plumeless thistle. To reiterate, I just wanted to compare the thistles I think cause the most confusion. On the left, you have the musk thistle, the invasive exotic, and the other three guys on the right are some of the similar natives that we talked about. Look at the flower shape. it's key and it's quite different. Again, musk thistle is described as having a bowl-shaped flower, while these other three guys have a shaving brush-shaped flower. And again, these are all three species that tend to get confused with musk thistle, but are actually natives that we want to keep around. So that is just a brief overview of thistles in Oklahoma. Just a reminder about our poster. They are free and available at our website. So if you want one, please get in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy. Let's see, I'm looking for the chat. We have nobody's put any questions in, so we won't take any questions right now, but if you have a question for Amy and you want to ask it, put it in the chat and we'll talk about it after the session. Oh, can you just download the poster or can you get one mailed? Actually, right now we're just mailing. We need to put a PDF up so people can just download it and print it out as a small handout. People are asking if we could get a copy of the slides. We won't do copies of slides, but we will post this recording on our website.
And if there's any, oh, I'm sorry. And if there's any information specifically you want from the slides, you can feel free to contact me and I'll try and help you out.
And somebody asks, is there a key or a book for Thistles of Oklahoma or North America? As far as I know, there's not a book. Do you know of a book, Amy?
The Oklahoma Invasive Plant Council, along with OSU Natural Resources, are going to eventually prepare a booklet that includes all of the thistles and some more common lookalikes. I am currently compiling for the information for that, and I really should get back to it. So eventually there will be a free small booklet of thistles in Oklahoma specifically. And as for the United States as a whole, I don't know, and I doubt it.
We also have a question about potentially a PDF to send to landowners. Right now, before we put something together as the Invasive Plant Council, we would suggest you use the Thistles of Oklahoma fact sheet that OSU has produced, and that would probably be a good thing. There's a question about how to manage. We will get to that at the end of the third presentation with Jodie. So we'll talk about management then. Let's see. Somebody asked how to request the poster. You go to our website, okinvasives.org, and it's right at the top. So just fill out your address and we will send you one in the next couple weeks. Hi, everybody. I'm Priscilla Crawford. I work at the Oklahoma Biological Survey, and I also am a member of the Oklahoma Invasive Plant Council. I help to organize these webinars and some of our other meetings. And I'm going to talk about the thistles and our regulations here in the state, specifically, or in detail, the noxious weed law. So as Amy mentioned earlier, the noxious weed law was set in 2000. So gosh, almost 25 years ago. And right now, the noxious weed law only covers 3 species. Some places I see that it also covers field bindweed, but not all areas that I have found the information for the noxious weed law includes bindweed. So I'm not sure what the official status is. However, we have these 3 thistles that are covered in the noxious weed law that's set by the legislature in 2000. And as Amy mentioned, it is the duty of every landowner to treat, control, eradicate all of the Canada musk or Scotch thistles that they have on their property. It is also regulated that anybody who owns public land, so the Department of Transportation, county commissioners, any cities and municipalities that own land also need to maintain the right-of-way as thistle-free. This law does not apply to tribal lands, so this regulation will not apply to any of the lands owned by the tribes or managed by the tribes, but anything owned by state and city entities. So particularly rights of way. We see a lot of these invasive species on roadways. So who has the regulatory authority to make sure that this law is enforced? It is the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food and Forestry. I'll refer to it as ODAF. And in particular, the Consumer Protection Services, and their website is here on the screen. And in particular, Dre Williams at ODAF is the person who is responsible for the enforcement of the noxious weed law. So how is the noxious weed law applied? So what you need to do is to file a formal complaint. Say you see a roadside that has a bunch of thistles growing and you believe they are exotic invasive thistles, one of the 3 in our list. You submit a formal complaint, which is this form that you see here on the screen. So we have all of these things highlighted in yellow must be completed for the form to be official. So that includes signing your own name. So there are no anonymous complaints accepted. So if you're tattling on your neighbor is going to know who submitted the complaint. So all of the information must be completed and submitted to the Department of Agriculture. And then the Department of Agriculture will contact the landowner and then send them a packet. That packet will contain a copy of the law. It'll contain information on thistle identification. It'll contain information on how to manage your infestation, and then it'll also contain another form for the landowner, and that will be a compliance form, which will indicate that you plan, if you have the infestation, that you plan to control the thistle on your property for the current year and for the following growing season. And this is an important part. This needs to be returned to ODAF. The landowner that has the infestation must return it at that time. The management form, when it's completed, signed, and returned to ODAF, is kind of an acknowledgement by the landowner so that they know that they have the thistle, they understand the noxious weed law, and they have a management plan for the current year or and for the next growing season. If the landowner has a complaint the next year, ODAF will make a site visit at that point to verify noncompliance. The ODAF field agent will make sure that the thistle is identified correctly. They will also look, if it's a musk thistle infestation, they will look for the musk thistle weevil, and if there's a presence there, I'll talk about that in a minute. If they are not complying, and they could be potentially fined up to $1,000 per day. Fines are rarely assessed, and the goal is compliance and not penalties. They want people to manage their thistle population. This is not a money-making venture for the Department of Agriculture. So I talked to Dre Williams, who administers this program, and he says that they generally get 30 to 40 formal complaints. So the full form is filled out, and he gets many more calls and emails, which they don't address. I think they give some advice at that point. Some of those turn into formal written complaints, but they only get about 30 to 40 complaints a year. He actually said that it seems to be complaints are going down in recent years. I'm not sure why that's the case, because the invasive thistle problem is not getting any less in the state. He says that even the formal complaints, it's actually a misidentification of the thistles. So making sure that you pay attention to Amy's portion of the talk about identification of native versus invasive thistles, and then getting resources to make sure that they are not misidentified. So before you turn somebody in, be sure that you are identifying it correctly. He said that most landowners who receive the complaints are not aware of the noxious weed law. And like I said, fines are rarely assessed. And since Dre has taken over this management of the whole program, he has not assessed any fines in the last 4 years. And he was also a field agent before this, and he was not aware of any fines being imposed. As I mentioned, the musk thistle weevil is a biological control. The flowers look healthy when the weevil is infesting the flower head. You can see the weevil down here. It is eating the seeds in the seed head of the flower. If there's enough weevil in the population, it is considered a form of control. So even though it may look like a healthy stand of thistle, it may be that there is weevil present, and it is in compliance with the noxious weed law. And the weevil now, I think originally was found in the eastern part of the state, but Dre seems to indicates that the weevil is now across the entire state, and can be found controlling thistle in all of the places that musk thistle is found. To report invasive species, you can go to our website, okinvasives.org, and you hit this big red button to take you to the Report Invasive Species page. You can report for informational purposes. So you don't have to send a formal complaint to ODAF just to report it. For informational purposes, you can do a citizen science report on iNaturalist or with the early detection mapping system. And you can get to those links through our website, invasive.org. You can also file the formal complaint through the noxious weed law. Finding that form on the ODAF website may be difficult. This is a link to the page to find that form to fill out. It's in the plant industry section of the web page, but you can also go to our web page, and I have added a button to read the noxious weed law and get to the noxious weed law form. We do have a few other regulations that are specific to noxious weeds or invasive species. There is a regulation for weed seed. So it's unlawful to sell, offer for sale, or expose for sale any agricultural or vegetable seed that has a noxious weed. And this is a different list. So noxious weed seeds have, that list is 37 species, and it includes all 3 of the invasive thistles that we are highlighting today, as well as 34 other species. And then there's also the weed-free hay certification. Field inspectors that go out to certify weed-free hay will not give you the special certification if you have any of the regional noxious weed species as determined by the National Association of Invasive Species Management. And then or any of our state noxious weeds, which are the 3 thistles. So if you have any of those species in your pasture before you hay it and bale it up, then you will not be certified. Oh, somebody suggests that the state needs an online reporting system. That would be ideal. That is, I'm not responsible for that. Do they measure weevil density per a certain area to determine if there's enough? Yes, they do measure weevil density. I am not sure what that weevil density is, but when the inspector comes out for non-compliance, they will look to see if there's a certain density of weevil to say if it is being controlled or not. If there's no other questions, we will move on to Jodie. You can take over. She's a field scientist with Corteva, Agroscience, and she's going to talk to us about thistle management. And Jody, whenever you're ready to take over the screen.
Jodie Crose. I work as a field scientist, so I work in research and development for Corteva Agroscience. We are a pesticide manufacturing company. I work specifically in range and pasture, so I don't really do anything related to agronomics, so wheat or corn or anything like that. But I am a member of the Oklahoma Invasive Plant Council, and we all are here, I think, because we know that thistles are a big issue. So it's great that we're all interested in this education and trying to get out there and do something about it too. So some of the things that I want to talk through today, first of all, I want to mention different weed control options. Even though I work for a pesticide manufacturing company, which means I work primarily with herbicides, I'm well aware that there are plenty of other options out there, and I'm definitely an advocate of utilizing all the tools in the toolbox. I also want to discuss integrated weed management and some of the benefits that we can get from those practices. And then I am going to dive more into chemical control. I want to talk a little bit on how to read the label, since that's a very important part of herbicide application. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about a couple different options for controlling thistles, our invasive thistles, some that are non-selective and then some that are selective. So ultimately, I'm going to help trying to avoid having fields like that on the right-hand side of this slide where it is a dense stand of Canada thistle. So there's more than one option to control these thistles. So the first one that's pretty foundational is preventative. So examples of this, any method or practice that you can use that ultimately just prevents introduction of those species to an area is what this is discussing. So for example, Priscilla mentioned like weed-free hay. That's a great example of a preventative method. Also cleaning equipment between fields is another one. So there's several examples. It's just being mindful that those seeds are present and that they can very easily be moved around. So keeping that in mind in the practices that we do while we're out there is important in order to prevent new introductions. Also, there are cultural methods that we can employ to reduce weed populations as well. Some of these techniques include competition. For example, using cover crops is a very common one. Also, utilizing, well, that's the main one for cultural practices that I'm aware of. For mechanical practices, many of us are familiar with mowing. This one's often used in range and pasture, along our roadsides, things like that. For weed management, tillage is another example. We don't see that one so much outside of a true cropping system, but it is another example. Physical, like weed pulling, is also another example of how to reduce these populations, even though that one can be far less pleasant, especially if you're dealing with thistles. Priscilla also mentioned biological control, which is really fascinating, and there's only so many species out there that we necessarily have this option with. It takes a lot of research to be done in order to determine if a specific critter can be used as a biological control agent. But once they do pass all those tests and we realize that they are very specific to controlling that species that we want controlled, they can be an awesome tool. So that weevil that Priscilla mentioned is a great one for thistles, especially if you're in a situation where chemical options aren't necessarily something that you can use in your toolbox. I would say a lot of these things that I've mentioned already are great options for you to consider using in your system. And then lastly, chemical control options are part of part of the toolbox. And specifically when we're talking about plants, we're talking about herbicides, and they can be a very effective way to reduce populations, especially when used in conjunction with some of these other tools. So this is known as integrated weed management, or IWM. And there's a lot of benefits to utilizing multiple methods to control these weed species that we have. Some of these include improved control of weeds, right? So we're coming at these thistles with multiple options, and we have the potential. So depending upon what stage they're at, how far along they are in their growth system, if we can use multiple tools sometimes, or if you think about it from the perspective of year after year, so long-term management, utilizing these different tools is also a great way to get rid of these thistles. It also reduces the potential for herbicide resistance to develop. This is a pretty hot topic right now because it's a serious one. We're seeing it a lot with different chemical products that we have on the market right now. So it's our responsibility to use these products diligently, knowing when to use them, how to use them, what to use them in conjunction with. All these things can help us reduce the potential for herbicide resistance to develop, as well as utilizing other options when we have them. It also encourages the idea of long-term management. So oftentimes we get in this cyclical process, this annual process of, oh, it's spring, I need to start thinking about going out and what weeds I need to control and things like that. But we just think about it on that every spring that comes around. Oh yeah, I need to be thinking about that. Well, when you think about IWM, you're thinking about it as a management plan. It's long-term management. These species aren't necessarily going away, so we need to be diligent, like I said, with how we use these tools and thinking about it in the long term. And then lastly, I just want to touch again about how it incorporates all of our tools. That's a very important aspect of IWM. And on the right, I really like this graphic mostly because it talks about prevention as being the foundation. Obviously, prevention is the most cost-effective and time-efficient way to manage these species. So reducing their spread is the best way to get a hold of them. But whenever they're already present in an area, utilizing all these different tools, chemical, mechanical, cultural, all those together to reduce their overall populations. So let's transition a little bit more specifically into chemical control. I mentioned I want to talk about how to read the label. This is a conversation that I feel like I end up having quite a bit with landowners that are trying to deal with these issues. And some people are more aware, some are less aware, but the label is the law, and not to like crack the whip or be like that. But as a consumer, it is your responsibility to be knowledgeable of that product and knowledgeable of the information that's on that label, and use that product according to the information that's on that label. So just some general sections that are kind of on every herbicide label that are important to you as a consumer. The herbicide group number. So here we see at the top, this is the herbicide group number. So these groups have been developed in the last 30, 40 years as we've seen an increase in herbicide resistance. It's been encouraged to include this information on the label so that you as a consumer can be aware of different modes of action. So that's what this group number is related to. So for every herbicide, it has a specific area within the plant that it targets, and that's related to the mode of action for that product. Utilizing multiple modes of action is another way that we reduce herbicide resistance. So just being mindful of what group numbers you're using, different modes of action that you're using, can be beneficial to reduce resistance. Secondly, the active ingredient information. So on this label, it's down here. So this is just a version of glyphosate that my company produces. It will give you the percentage of active ingredient, but it will also give you the pound per gallon down below it. Additionally, something that I see that's fairly common when discussing this with people is that not all products are labeled to be applied in all areas. So it's very important to pay attention to this use site information. So those are the specific areas in which that product can be applied. And generally, sometimes there's more specific information whenever you dive down more into the label, but this is just a brief overview. So if you were shopping at your local co-op or something like that, you could see right here whether or not you could use this product in the area that you need to use it in. Also, each herbicide will have a signal word. So that's this. So there are 3 signal words. There's caution, warning, and danger. Caution is the least toxic, so it's related to toxicity to humans. So caution is the least toxic, warning is the mid, and danger is obviously the most toxic. So it's important to pay attention to that for your own health and safety. Additionally, proper or personal protective equipment. I messed that up. I said proper protective equipment, but you get the idea. PPE. So this is another section that's important to you as a person who's likely going to be applying this product. It will tell you specifically what you need to wear whenever you're using this product. Obviously, if you want to wear more, that's never discouraged, but this is the bare minimum of what you should be wearing when you're using these products. Also, we have first aid suggestions. So in case there was an accident of some sort, there will be specific first aid information according to where, what area of your body is necessarily being affected. So if it's in your eyes, if it's in your skin, sometimes if you've accidentally ingested it, there will be all that information in this first aid section. Additionally, important to note is that there will be a phone number for either you to call or a doctor if you need to go to the emergency room. That will give them specific information on what to do to treat that product specifically. So pay attention to this section if that's a concern for you. And then also some important hazards to be aware of when using that individual product. So environmental hazards, physical hazards, things like that. These are just all sections that you as an individual using these products should be aware of. Also, obviously, there's going to be very specific information related to the use of those products. So there's going to be mixing directions, application rates, and minimum carrier volumes. So a lot of times if a product is labeled to be applied aerially, there will be a minimum carrier volume specified for that application method. Also, you'll have suggested tank mix partners. So other products, other herbicides that are known to already be compatible with that product might be mentioned. Specific surfactants that might be required. So a methylated seed oil or a non-ionic surfactant might be mentioned specifically within that label information. Also, application directions. I mentioned those different use sites. So there might be different application directions for, say, applying in a ditch bank relative to in your pasture. So it's important to be mindful that that information is included in the label and to check it out. Also, appropriate application timing. So sometimes there will be, say there's a specific problematic weeds, maybe it's a thistle. Sometimes there will be very specific information related to a species, but also it could be more general, as in this product only works when applied after a species is already emerged, or it might be the opposite, and this product is only active whenever it's applied pre-emergent, so prior to those species emerging. Different harvest intervals, so if you're working in a cropping system, or if you're baling hay or silage, anything like that, there will be specific information about that. Also, any grazing restrictions that you're interested in will also be mentioned in the label. Clearly, we should have susceptible weeds mentioned on the label as well. Sometimes you'll have different rates mentioned for different weeds. So it's important to take in the whole label and make sure that you don't just, oh, it says 10 fluid ounces per acre. Okay, you need to find the specific weed that you're looking for if it's mentioned in the label and see if there's a specific rate required for that species. And then lastly, if there's any precautions associated with the use of that product. So maybe you have a pasture that has a lot of fescue in it and you're worried maybe that the product could ding your fescue. If that's the case, it should be mentioned in the label. So that would be an example of a precaution that you should be aware of before using that product. On the right here, I've included a URL for what I think is the best label database out there. It's called CDMS. Basically, whenever you find this label database, you can search by the commercial name of that product. So say Roundup, for example, you could type in Roundup and it's going to pull up every Roundup label that exists. One thing you cannot do with CDMS is to search by the common name. So if you were to type in glyphosate, it's not going to be helpful. You have to use the commercial name if you're using CDMS. All right, so I mentioned some specific chemical control options for thistles. I'm sure this might be why a lot of us are here, but how do we get out there and actually reduce those populations? And how do we do it diligently? So the first product that I want to mention is glyphosate. Both of these products are non-selective. So we have to, I would say, in my opinion, the best situation to use these two products is in an individual plant treatment. So an IPT treatment, where you're going out with a wand or a gun and you're targeting specific plants that you know are the ones that you want to control. So not a broadcast application where you're going out across the whole pasture. You don't want to use these products because they're going to kill everything because they're non-selective. An example of glyphosate is Roundup, obviously, but there are several versions of glyphosate out there that you can purchase now, not just Roundup. There is no pesticide license required for this purchase. You can just go into your local co-op and pick up a 2.5 gallon of Roundup. And then, as I mentioned, it's great for an individual plant treatment. The rates do vary. So I included a table here at the bottom. If you're going to be mixing up, say a gallon, you're just going to go out on your Ranger every evening and look for thistles that you think are cropping up in your pasture and your ditch banks, something like that. And you can just mix up a percent by volume of these products. So that's how this table is laid out. A lot of times it's volume per volume, so amount of product versus the amount of carrier water. So here's a handy little table for glyphosate. Also, something that's important to know about glyphosate is that it's a systemic herbicide, which means that when you apply it, it's going to move through the plant, and that takes time. So because of that, the symptomology also takes time. So you have to be a little bit more patient with glyphosate before you're going to start seeing symptoms, but that does not mean that it is not working. In contrast to that, we have paraquat, which is a contact herbicide, and because of that, you see symptomology very quickly. A lot of times, you guys are probably familiar with paraquat. Bromoxone is the commercial name for it. It is a lot different from glyphosate, the biggest being toxicity. So it is a restricted use pesticide. And what that means is that you must have a pesticide applicator's license to purchase and to apply this product. It is a very dangerous product, so paying attention to that PPE section is very important, and making sure that you follow those rules to reduce your exposure to this product is very important. So just be mindful of that if you're interested in this product. Be very careful with it, but here's again another table. If you're wanting to mix up a small batch of paraquat to go do some spot applications, this is on the label. So now I'm going to start talking about some selective options. So these are all products that are produced by my company. The first one that I want to talk about is Milestone. So all of these products are going to be what we call growth regulator herbicides. So they essentially mimic the auxin hormone in the plants and essentially encourage the plant to grow itself to death, is how these products work. So Milestone is a product that's been around for a while now. The active ingredient in it is called aminopyrrolid. There are some new restrictions around aminopyrrolid that are related only to hay. So if you're going to use this product, the hay, if you were going to bale hay in the area, it cannot be treated within the prior 18 months prior with aminopyrrolid to be moved off site. So essentially, if you use aminopyrrolid, you would be required to wait 18 months before you can move that hay to an area that was not treated with aminopyrrolid. So just be mindful of that if you're wanting to use this in your pasture. But it's a great product. It's labeled in many areas. It can be used in your native rangeland, in permanent pasture, non-crop areas, so those ditch banks, around your barns, things like that. Also, it's labeled in natural areas. So if you're a natural area manager, this is a great product for you to use specifically for invasive species control, but also this PDF that I've attached here is, we've done a lot of work looking at forb tolerance, so native forb tolerance to Milestone at a couple different rates. And this PDF discusses the species that we found to be tolerant versus the ones that are not tolerant. But this is a product that we tend to encourage in those areas that have invasive species in them that need controlled. They're too large for individuals to go out and pull them individually, but they're worried about their forb populations. So this is a product that we encourage in those situations. Specifically for bull and musk thistle, the 3 to 5 fluid ounce rate per acre is what we would encourage to use for Milestone. If you have Canada, Scotch, or milk thistle, you need to bump that rate up to from 5 to 7 fluid ounces. Application timing for those species. For Canada, since it's a perennial, the best time is either the rosette stage or the bud stage. So you can apply all the way up essentially to just prior to the plant's flowering with Milestone. And you should at that 5 to 7 fluid ounce rate, and you should be able to control it. For all the other species, I'm going to recommend the rosette stage just because the smaller the better. It's always easier to kill a smaller weed. But you can apply up to a similar stage as well. And then lastly, all of the products that I'm going to talk about from now on are all grass safe. So that's that selectivity coming through. We also do see some forb safety at lower rates with Milestone. Another product that I want to talk about is Graze On Next. So this is a combination of 2 different chemicals, so aminopyrrolid and 2,4-D, but it's the amine formulation. Again, because we have aminopyrrolid in this product, you still have the hay restrictions. The use sites are pretty similar for Grazon as to Milestone. The only difference is we don't have those non-crop areas on this label. So be mindful of that if you're trying to use it in areas like your ditch banks and around your barns and around your fences and things like that. There is no grazing restriction with any of these products. The rate that I would encourage to control bull and musk is 19 to 24 fluid ounces per acre, 24 to 34 for Canada and Scotch. So those two are obviously a little tougher. So we're gonna have to up the rate a little bit for those two. This product is gonna have a broader spectrum. So that's why I included it. Not only are you using two different chemicals, so you're diversifying a little bit your sites of action inside the plant where those herbicides are going to work. But also, if you're interested in controlling more than just thistle, this is going to broaden your spectrum. Again, we still have the grass safety, and you should be a little bit more cautious around woody species and your forbs, primarily because of that 2,4-D component. So just be mindful of that when you're using this product. And lastly, this can be used, it can be impregnated onto dry fertilizer. A lot of times we see that on ammonium nitrate, and you can use this in your pasture. So you can do, instead of doing 2 passes where you go out and apply your fertilizer and then you come back and spray, you can combine the two and knock that out with 1 pass. One thing I do want to mention, just because of the 2,4-D component in this, it's not a giant issue, but in Jackson and Silman counties, there is a 2,4-D restriction for a part of the year. So just be mindful of that if you're living in those areas and you want to use this product. All right, Duracor is the next one that I want to discuss. Also 2 different chemicals, so aminopyrrolid and fluorpyroxafen. Fluorpyroxafen is a new active ingredient. We just released this one in the last 4 years or so. Again, same use sites pretty much as Grazon Next, except for the non-crop area. Again, the grazing restriction, hay, all of that still applies. The rate is different. So you want to use 12 fluid ounces for bull or musk thistle control, and 16 to 20 for Canada and Scotch. We do have a broader spectrum with this one as well. This one is particularly very good on species in the carrot family. So I've seen a lot of people discussing Queen Anne's lace and some of the other species in the carrot family that are seems to be becoming more of a problem. This is a great product if you have thistles and Queen Anne's lace or other carrot species that you're trying to get a hold on. Again, similar as Grazon, grass safety, forb, and woody species might be impacted. And this one can also be used on impregnated dry fertilizer. And an example of that I actually did a couple months ago. So this was 1 month after application. You can see that that's a pretty large thistle. And with 150 pounds of ammonium nitrate impregnated with 20 fluid ounces of Duracor, we completely killed that thistle within a month. So it's a great option, especially for controlling those species in your pasture. Okay, very last one. Sorry, I'm sure you're tired of me rambling on, but the last one I want to talk about is TerraView. So this one is very similar to Duracor. It has the same chemical components, but they are in different percentages. And this product is labeled in those non-crop areas. That's actually why I wanted to bring it up. So if you want a selective product to use in your non-crop areas, this might be a good one for you. All those same things that I mentioned previously with aminopyrrolid still apply here. And the suggested rate for all 3 or for all of the species, thistle species we've been discussing is 2 to 2.85 ounces. So this product is actually a dry formulation. So agitation is very important if you're going to be using this product. You want to make sure that you get it completely dissolved in your water and everything like that. So be mindful of agitation if you're interested in this one. Lastly, I just wanted to mention briefly, we are working on updating, kind of expanding off of that milestone Forbes safety data that I mentioned previously with peer review. So this is some preliminary data that we're working on with Forbes safety. So the green stands for tolerance, yellow stands for moderately tolerant, orange is moderately susceptible, and red is completely susceptible. So at the highest rate of tear review, we have a pretty large group of species that are tolerant to tear review at 1 year after treatments. So quite a few Forbes that seem to show tolerance to this product. So if you're interested in using it on your roadsides or things like that, anywhere that's labeled, and you're specifically concerned about Forb tolerance, this is a product that you might be interested in. So I just wanted to throw this out there. This is still preliminary data. We're still working on getting the full picture here, but this is just a snapshot that I wanted you guys to be aware of. That's all I have. The only thing that I wanted to say is remember that this stage is better than this stage for applying. So try and get out there early in the fall, early spring to get a handle on these species. And if you have any questions, there's my contact information.
Thanks, Jodie. We do have some questions in the chat. So we have one from a little bit earlier. It says, after pulling blooming musk thistle for a day or two in May, my gloves are full of spines and I switch over to glyphosate spray. But then I notice that by June, it looks like even though the plant is browned out, the seed head is fluffy. It gives me an impression that they are viable. Is there any knowledge on if spraying will affect the viability of the seeds?
That's a great question. So I can't speak necessarily to knowing that for sure those seeds were not viable, but there has been research done to show that herbicide applications do impact seed viability. We actually have done some work with aminopyrrolid that has shown that there is a reduction in seed viability after that product was applied, especially even later on during flowering for some species. So that information or that idea isn't far-fetched. It can be the case. But like I said, I can't say specifically for your situation with that product.
Another question is, I think referring back to that kind of Venn diagram you had about management. So is chemical management required for a good IWM prevention system?
I wouldn't say any of those are necessarily required. I'm always a fan of not ruling anything out if you don't have to. So if it's so for example, if you've been battling a species for a good while and you've thrown quite a few tools at it, mowing, pulling, all those different things, and you're still struggling to get a control or to reduce it, that might be the time you start thinking about a chemical option too. So
good. Let's see. We had some questions about what the group numbers meant, but we had Chad Cummings come in and answer a few of those questions, and he also gave another link to help, I think, interpret some of that label information. Somebody had a question about prescribed fires as being effective control, and Laura Goodman, also a board member of the Invasive Plant Council, popped in to say that there's been kind of mixed results with fire and thistle control and seed germination. And would you have anything to add about prescribed fires and controlling thistles?
Laura, I would say, is the expert on that one. I would say don't rule out fire if you don't have to. But as far as specifically to thistle control, I don't necessarily have any firsthand knowledge. So I would toss that one to Laura.
And then another question is, can you clarify if these chemicals are truly killing the plant or just knocking back, like browning it out, the above ground portion, but the root still continuing to regrow?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's actually something that we look at whenever we're doing our evaluations, whether it's just brownout or if it's actual true necrosis and death. It's going to depend, honestly, but some tips it's going to depend on growth habits. So whether it's an annual or perennial, first of all, and then just some things to maybe think about if you're out there kind of evaluating what's going on. If you were to break a stem and you still see like green tissue inside the stem, I would say that you're still in the brownout stage. It might eventually become necrotic and die, but that's something to look for if you're out there monitoring your applications.
Thanks. And then I think our last question is, do you have any recommendations for the most effective control in organic cropping systems?
As far as thistles go specifically, I'm assuming.
I'm assuming.
I don't have, so I'm just going to go back to that, utilizing the different IWM options. So if you're in an organic system and you're not interested in using any type of chemical control, I would really dig deep on what control methods that are effective for your system. And my guess, this is gonna probably not be a very exciting answer, but a lot of times hand pulling weeds early on is unfortunately one of the best ways, even though that's very labor intensive. But that's a great effective mechanical way to remove those species. But also that biological control too with thistles is a great one as well. So I would definitely lean on those weevils a little bit too, if you can.
Yes, and Laura Goodman seconds the biological control for organic systems. That looks like the last question we have. I think we'll wrap it up, and I want to encourage everyone to save the date for the Oklahoma Invasive Species Conference, Friday, December 1st. We will be meeting at the Lake Arcadia Education Center in Edmond. And remember, if you find these webinars helpful and useful, please consider joining the Oklahoma Invasive Plant Council. You can become a member for a very small fee, and this will help fund the posters, the webinars, and all of the educational opportunities that we have throughout Oklahoma and throughout the year. Any other comments from our speakers?
No, Priscilla, thank you for moderating, as always.
You're welcome. Thanks, Amy and Jody, for sharing your expertise, and we will wrap up. Remember, this webinar has been recorded, and we will have it up on our website within the week. Thanks, everybody.